Hello, this is Jeff Vanderstelt, Executive Director of Saturate and the host of the Saturate podcast. Saturate exists to serve and equip leaders to start and strengthen unified gospel city movements that lead to gospel saturation, to the end that every man, woman, and child has repeated opportunities to meet Jesus through his church on mission everywhere and every day. We believe this will require, as Jesus prayed in John 17, that the church is unified together in a region and collaborating around 5 key initiatives that we see the Apostle Paul work out that Luke records in Acts 13 and 14. And that is a commitment to prayer and fasting, to disciple making, to leaders getting healthy, serving the city in tangible ways so the kingdom of God is made visible, and then starting new churches and new kingdom initiatives. Presently in this episode, we're spending some time talking about disciple making. I actually had the privilege of speaking into and also helping to create the overall theme and direction for Exponential 2024, which will be in March. And the theme this year is 180, a return to disciple making. We're going to be talking about 5 key shifts that are needed for us to return to disciple making. I've also put this into a free ebook that Exponential is making available if you want it, or you can purchase it on Kindle or on paperback on Amazon. Now, this episode, we're going to be talking in particular about one shift, and that is the shift from just reaching more people to actually making disciples who make disciples. And Jay Pathak is going to be one of the speakers who's speaking on this at Exponential this next year. And more specifically, the topic he will be talking about is this idea of building a disciple-making pathway. Now, Jay is the National Director of Vineyard USA, started doing that in January 22. He also serves as the lead pastor of the Mile High Vineyard, which is a family of neighborhood churches in Denver that he and his wife Danielle planted back in 2001. And he co-wrote a book that I would highly recommend called The Art of Neighboring with Dave Runyon. I mean, it's a great tool, great book to help you or the people you lead really learn how to be good neighbors in such a way that we can be on mission too with the neighborhood that God's put us in. It's a super, super great book on hospitality, how to build those relationships and see God open doors and build bridges for the gospel to be shared. And I think that's one of the reasons why that book was something that he reluctantly wrote, because it's a labor of love, because he cares a lot about sharing his faith with the people around him. That's really a key part of his calling. So Jay, I'm so thankful you're here, and I would love it if you would share anything more that you think would be helpful for our listeners to know about you as we enter into this conversation. Because as you know, a lot of times the context of our life helps shape the framework of our conversation. So anything else you would want to share in addition to what I just said?
I think all I'd want to add is that I was not raised in a Christian home at all. So I have no church background. So, I am a professional Christian, and that's a joke if you didn't catch it. But I mean, honestly, I'm being really honest here. I mean, even to this point, I'm still regularly learning about what this thing called the church is and this faith that's been handed to us. And so in some ways that affords me some interesting opportunities, because my heart really does break for people that don't yet have a life with Jesus. And in general, I'm not caught up with a lot of the trappings a lot of pastors have been caught up in, but it means I'm at some deficits. I'm regularly learning new things. Like, wow, there's like a whole world out here where people have been doing this for thousands of years, and they're genuinely helpful for how we think about building churches. And so we planted the church we're in with 10 friends. We moved out. I waited tables. In every way, it resembled a cult, I'm sure. So, you know what I mean? Like, you meet in a home, it's like when your pastor works at a Chinese restaurant, it's like, I don't know if that's real. But mostly we grew by just seeing people come to know Jesus, walk into new life with Jesus, which meant it was a entirely chaotic church. But that built into being multi-site and then a family of neighborhood churches. So kind of stem to stern, top to bottom, side to side. We've gotten to do every single thing. So I just love pastors, leaders who are just trying to figure out how to do this. There's so much to learn. There's so much innovation based on context. And so, yeah, I mean, even the work we do in the Vineyard, our hope is to serve the whole body of Christ. I just love the church. I love the way people are helping people meet Jesus. So it's an honor to work. Anything I get to do near Exponential, I'm in, because I believe in the work and the way they're serving pastors in the church.
Yeah, I love the perspective you bring. I mean, it's great if you get to grow up in a church, and there's lots of benefits and blessings in that. But to be able to have your perspective, I think, is really significant, because you do get to, what it's like to not be a part of it and to not get it. So, man, that's in some ways, I mean, all of our stories are a gift, but that's a unique gift that you get to bring. So,
yeah, it is. And it also means I'm fairly clueless regularly in a lot of church environments. Yeah. And so, and now I'm leading a movement of churches. It's like, wow, okay, I guess who would have guessed this? I wouldn't have.
God's kindness and humor, right?
Totally. No, it is. It is grace.
Yeah.
To me. I'm very grateful.
Yeah.
But it is.
That's great.
A big learning curve. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I'm curious, how have you personally experienced the transformative power of disciple making in your own journey? I mean, you were not in the church. Somehow you came to follow Jesus. Like, how did that work? Tell us a little bit more about your own journey and how disciple making obviously affected you. You're here. Something happened.
Yeah.
So
I got pulled in, man. Yeah. I mean, I had an encounter with God in my room one night. I'd been reading the Bible for a while, mostly because I was confused. I'd been pulled into a Young Life deal, and they got a Bible there. And at that night, I had a weird experience where I thought, I think God's in this place. I didn't know what that meant, because I'd never had anything like that happen. So anyway, I read the Bible kind of scanning around looking for that. And it wasn't until I read Romans 7 and 8, I had that kind of the same experience in my room. It'd been a year later. And so I went back to the guy that took me to that weird meeting, that Young Life meeting. I in my mind thought of it as a Christian karaoke party, because, we sang songs and stuff. Because that's what worship looks like.
Yes, right. Yeah.
So anyway, he said, well, you got to come to church with me. You've had this experience. You got to come to church with me. So I went to this church, and they were, I think, in their 8th year in the book of Hebrews.
8th year?
Year. Yeah.
Wow.
8th year. Yeah. So it was like, I don't know what's happening. I didn't understand what the words meant. I didn't understand anything.
Wow.
But I'd had this experience with God. So it was like, well, I guess this is what we do now. Like, I guess this is it. And I remember my memories of that are having no idea what's going on and being in the basement. I grew up in Ohio, so I'm in the basement of this Baptist church after the service, where there was potlucks, and I would be hugged with people wearing sweaters. That's my most enduring memories. Yeah, just being confused. Like, I don't know what this is, but these people seem nice. But the weirdest thing happened, I think it would have been maybe a month in to going to this church, because I just thought I had to. And this guy out of nowhere walked up and handed me a tape. This tells you how old I am. And he handed me a tape, and he said, I was cleaning out my house, and I thought about you. Now, this is a guy I'd maybe talked to twice, again, at one of these potlucks. Older guy. And I think you should listen to this tape. And I said, okay. So I went home, and I remember popping it in, and I was driving home. And it was a talk by a guy named Dawson Trotman, who some people would know, but most people wouldn't. He started a ministry that became known as the Navigators. And this talk was a talk called Born to Reproduce. And I listened to this talk. Again, I know nothing. I literally know nothing other than I've had this encounter with God, has something to do with Jesus. And I listen to this talk, and I think, this checks out. This makes sense. And I had known enough to know that what had happened to me, I wanted other people to have. I didn't know how to talk about that. I wasn't sure how to do that.
Hmm.
But when I heard that, I thought, yeah, this makes sense. And so honestly, Jeff, I mean, this is going to sound pretty simple, but pretty much everything I've ever known how to do in ministry came, I think, out of listening to that tape driving home. Because what became clear to me was anything I have, I'm supposed to give away.
Hmm.
Anything I've learned, anything I know about life
Mm-hmm.
with God, I'm supposed to give away. And I'm supposed to do that in an intentional way that helps other people give that to other people.
Hmm.
And so what I just said sounds really simple, but it's actually harder than you think. Like to
Yeah.
because like
Yeah.
who's hungry? Who wants that? And what kind of people? And how do you do that by talking to them? Do you do that by doing stuff with them? Do you do that over meals? Or there's a lot of ways to do what I just said, but that one thought was like a virus
Hmm.
in my mind.
Wow.
And frankly, that virus has taken over my life.
Hmm.
And it turns out if you just do that enough, they start telling you you're a leader. Like I would go to a Bible study and I would take that Bible study and I would do it in another Bible study I made up with people that were friends of mine. And if anybody asked me a question, so, okay, I just learned, let's say Ephesians 1. That's on Monday. I go teach a Bible study on Wednesday. If in the Bible study somebody says, well, how does this square with this other verse in Galatians? I would just turn to the group and say, what do you think? And people would talk. And then I would say, okay, moving on. Like I didn't know. I didn't know where Galatians was. I didn't know. I don't know. I don't even know what you're asking me. But I figured out really quick, if I could immediately give away what was given to me, it was fresh and it got into me in a different way.
Hmm.
And so without even knowing why I was doing what I was doing, that was early on. And needless to say, early, like some of my friends that were believers, some of the folks that helped lead me to Christ, frankly found it a little annoying. Because they'd be like, why are you bringing up this thing from the Bible you read? I'm like, I don't know, because I thought it was interesting and I thought you'd find it interesting. And
isn't that what we do?
Shouldn't we tell people about this? And they'd be like, oh man, like, why you gotta be weird? We're just eating tacos or whatever. And I'd be like, I don't know. I think it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So I guess in one sense, I didn't know I was doing evangelism. And the other sense, I didn't know I was doing discipleship.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess even I understand the difference between the terms. I get it. But I didn't really know that there was any difference to any of it. It was just whatever I learned, whatever is given to me, it's my job to give it to people that can give it to people. That's my job as a follower of Jesus. Not as a pastor, not as a leader, just as a person.
Yeah.
And if you do that a few times, people start to notice. So, my girlfriend took me to another church because she was like, I don't think you understand anything happening at that church. You should come to church with me. And I said, sure. And I went. That was the first time I went to the Vineyard. And
all right.
Vineyard,
was that in Columbus?
In Columbus, Ohio. Yep.
Yeah.
That Vineyard Church. So it's a big church now.
Yeah, it is.
When I went.
Okay.
It was maybe 1,000 people when I went. And by the time I left to go plant, it was not quite. It was like 7,000 or 8,000 people.
Wow.
And so I show up and it was like, wait a minute. I understand everything everybody's saying. Like the songs make sense. There's like clear stuff to do. Like, hey, come to this class on the blah, blah, blah. And then there were small groups. So go to this small group. And so within a little bit, as I was in that small group, they said, well, we should have somebody start another small group. And I went, well, I think I've been doing that. I didn't know that's what that was called, but I'll do that. So then I started a small group and they started another small group. And then the church is like, would you like to intern? And I was like, it doesn't really pay enough. But I want to grow. And so I interned with the lead pastor. And so I think over 7 years, I led something like 25 small groups and would then train small group leaders and then do like outreach stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And what that did is it built a young adult ministry. There's this young adult ministry that grew to be about 1,000 people that was mostly just building small groups. And then we
Hmm.
had a gathering, but it was sort of bolstered by these 30-some small groups. So, and then that's when, if you do that, somebody says you should be a church planner. And you go, really? What does that mean? Well, what you just did, you just do that. You help people meet Jesus, you put them in groups, you train leaders, you just do that. And I'm like, oh. So even when we planted a church, I think I'd only preached 3 or 4 times on a main stage, other than youth group, which I did a bit. So I never got into being a pastor because I wanted to preach. I never got into being a pastor because I knew how to run a church. I just liked helping people fall in love with Jesus, live life together, train and multiply leaders. So in a very real way, I've kind of fell backward into all of this.
Yeah.
By just that one tape did something to me.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's interesting. The first book I was given when I became a Christian, when I surrendered to Jesus, started following him, was The Master Plan of Evangelism.
Another great
some
book.
ways a similar thing. It was like I didn't know anything else. This is
Totally
what you say it means to follow him, and I guess we go do this.
You just do that. And I mean, I just recently had a neighbor and his girlfriend, give their life to Jesus or baptized in our church. And I pulled out the Master Plan of Evangelism because he was like, what do I do with my friends? I said, well, here's a thought. I don't know. And we're reading Coleman's thing. And I said, let's just pray for your friends. And, it in all this stuff we do in ministry, we can make it really complicated.
Yeah.
And I love that people are way smarter than me. They know how to build websites, and they have like really important, like cool phrases and stuff they do. That's great. I love all that stuff. But if underneath it isn't this very simple way of sharing your faith, helping people follow Jesus, helping them grow in that faith and give away that faith, if that can be the seedbed, man, a lot of other stuff can work.
Yeah.
If you find ways of getting stuff done without doing that, it can get weird.
Yeah, I love the simplicity, and in this, in this session, we're going to be talking about this idea of a pathway, and you kind of just laid out 4 parts of a pathway right there.
Yep.
And it's super easy to explain and makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
Could pass it on easily. You got it. You gave it away. I mean, I love that.
Well, and then everything new you learn is working through a frame. Mm-hmm. So you're like, hey, I just learned how to, I don't know, pray for the sick, or I just learned a thing on how to read the Bible, or I just learned a thing on how to build my own prayer life, or forgiveness, to walk in healthier relationships. Whatever the content is then moves through this way of understanding that anything that I have is meant to be given away. Mm-hmm. Anything that bears fruit is meant to bear fruit in another's life that I help give away to bear fruit in someone else's life. And if I can just keep doing that.
Yeah.
And again, eventually they'll call you a pastor if you do that enough.
Now you're going to make some people not want to do it because they're like, I don't want to be a pastor.
Tell me about it. Listen, man, tell me about it. Because instead of trying to become a pastor so you learn how to do things, you can just do things.
Yeah.
And then you might be a pastor. I mean, so like in the life of our church, one day you just look up and go, gosh, there's like 1,000 people standing around. Mm-hmm. And that, honestly, this is going to sound like I'm being silly, but that creates another set of problems.
Yeah.
It gets more complicated, not less complicated. And that led us to some different models. That's why we have family, a family of neighborhood churches. We wanted to try and stay local. The art of neighboring stuff was really just kind of stuff we'd done, like get to know your neighbors, be hospitable, let the life of the kingdom flow naturally from your life. But these are things people can be trained to do. You don't have to be super, super gifted. You don't have to be able to clip on a mic and talk. You don't have to. Now, if you can also do those things, that'll help eventually.
Yeah. It can be helpful.
Yeah, you can do this. This isn't for like specialists.
That's right.
It can be done.
Yeah, everybody can do everything you just described. So, Yeah.
I think so. And they might not be able to do it at the level of like, you should write a book, or you're
Right.
going to preach
Right.
on a stage, or you're going to get a paycheck from a church or whatever. But where I get most sad, Jeff, is when I meet pastors that can't do the stuff I'm describing. They can do other kind of weird stuff that helps them lead a church.
Hmm.
That's really disappointing. Like,
Yeah,
oh
I
man,
know.
get your hands in the dirt. Like, get
That's right.
with the humans.
That's right. Yeah.
So yeah, anyway, so everything I know in ministry came that way around. And then it would be crisis. Like, this person's marriage is falling apart.
Hmm.
I bet somebody knows what to do. So I would go out and like read stuff until, no, I'm just like, somebody probably has done this before. So I just read
Just in time learning.
Seriously. No,
Yeah.
I mean, like,
Yeah.
I just, oh, wow, man, this person said this thing about how do we help people get a biblical worldview or read through the Bible intentionally. I'm like, I don't know, this is what I did, but that doesn't seem maybe substantial enough, or it doesn't seem to work for this type of person or whatever. Or youth ministry. I mean, I don't know, or raising kids. I have no idea. I wasn't raising any of this stuff. So
Yeah.
as long as I can stay curious and hungry for my own growth curve. I mean, now I'm national director of I mean, there's no guidebook for that. I don't know how to do
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
let me go ask some other people. Hey, you lead over here. You've led a corporation in this way. Like, what would you tell me? What would you do if you were me? No. So if you stay hungry, you keep learning, and you keep giving away, things just flow out of that. And there's people way smarter than me that build systems that can help. Like, okay, so now, Jay, if we're going to do that, we should have a leader night once a month. We can collect all those folks. Oh, perfect. Great. That'd be great. You're responding to fruit.
Yeah.
Or, hey, we can more intentionally train like this. Let's write a curriculum, or sure. Yeah. But it's because we've been doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Or we're with people that are doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. In light of all that, how would you define, I mean, you might have already done it, but how would you define what you think a mature disciple is? Maybe you've already said it.
Yeah. I mean, again, I could steal Dawson's talk. I could read it back to you. I mean, I think in order to define what you said, wisdom would say we should define what it isn't, not just what it is. Mm-hmm. So maturity, contrary to popular belief, is not passion. So people often notice excited people and therefore assume they're passionate. But listen, if you're around a church for more than like one meeting, you'll start to notice that passionate people often don't like actually do anything but be excited. So like, I'm a bona fide charismatic, like a real one, like a crazy man. Okay. So in my worlds, the person who's worshiping really hard must be mature. But that's not true. The person who prays really passionately. Passion is different than action. Like, does this actually move you to do things? Like real things with people. So that's the next thing to measure. People are like, oh, well, that person's really active. So often you'll meet someone and be like, man, they go to church every week, or they pray a lot, or they can regurgitate a bunch of like quotes from cool books. Okay, well, that's active. They're moving around a lot. But there's a big difference between activity and producing. Like, does it actually do things? Like you can be active and not have much fruit, real transformation in your life or in other people's lives. So then production is the next thing. And those are people who tend to be pastors. Like, hey, you've done some things and it does some things, so let's make you a leader or whatever. But that's where most people stop. Most people, maturity stops at the point of production. I can lead worship well. I can teach the Bible pretty well. I can pray and it seems to be effective and helpful for people. I can mentor kids. I can whatever it is. And that's usually the ceiling. But that isn't the definition of maturity. The definition of maturity is reproduction. Can I take the ways that God has given me grace to see fruit by his Spirit that runs through my life in gifts And can I train others to produce in the manner that God has given me grace to do?
Mm-hmm.
And that's maturity.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm not saying that means you can do all kinds of things, whatever you're able to do. Okay, whatever it is, if you can train other people, that builds a kind of maturity because, frankly, as you know, in that last bit, a lot of stuff happens.
Mm-hmm.
You have to think about character. You have to think
Mm-hmm.
about perseverance. You have to walk through suffering. You have to
Mm-hmm.
think about how forgiveness and all kinds of things, as you put life on life in training people, every other thing appears.
Mm-hmm.
If all I got to do is show up and do my worship set and go home, or all I got to do is show up and teach and go home, you can get away with a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But if I got to get into people's lives and be like, well, let me teach you to teach. And here's the way you get examples. And here's how and you start to realize, oh, wait a minute. You don't really have a prayer life, or you don't really, or this thing in your marriage is really not working. So that last bit is not just production, but reproduction. Mm-hmm. And so for me, anytime I'm talking to someone who's trying to grow in their life, I'm like, tell me about the ways you've seen God move in your life and how's that produce fruit in other people's lives. And tell me about the folks that you've trained and help do the things that God has given you grace to do. And it's usually in that last bit, people are like, what do you mean? It's a stopping point. I don't know what you're saying. What do you mean by that? So have you multiplied small groups? Have you multiplied worship leaders? Have you taught people to teach the Bible, not just teach the Bible? Mm-hmm. That's maturity. And that can be you're a 1 talent or a 10 talent person. But it's that reproducing of what God's entrusted to you that other people can do that. That's maturity in my mind.
Yeah, when I worked on trying to frame up the different parts of the talks for next year, the language I used was what you're describing is really spiritual parenting. You know, like we lead someone to go from spiritually dead to becoming a new child born again in the faith. Then we want to grow them up as a child, help them become a young adult that's probably an apprenticing towards being a spiritual parent. And spiritual parents reproduce. That's the whole point. And
that's right.
And I think a lot of times, at least when I've interacted with leaders or even individuals, they haven't thought through that process at all. And we wonder why we don't have disciple-making disciples.
Yes.
Well, if we've never actually made that an expectation, we never planned for it, we never asked the questions you just asked, why would we ever expect to see that happen?
Well, because you can build crowds out of doing a few things well.
That's right. Yep.
So if you can teach pretty well, and you can get someone to lead worship pretty well, and a few folks with some money like that, whatever you're doing, they're like, I like that. We should do more of that.
Yeah.
And then you have a few folks that can kind of administrate a few things. Like, I can make sure the trains run on time. We pay the bills. You can have a substantial thing. Like it'll be a big deal. But that doesn't mean that you're necessarily doing any of the things I just described. And then you can build little people moving mechanisms. Like, okay, we can get this kind of people to go do these kinds of things in a small group or in a class or whatever. But even that's not what I'm talking about. You can build containers that aren't kind of driven by this heart to give life away to people that give life away. So it's possible to build mechanisms that don't produce fruit in the manner we're describing.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's interesting. I can sit with pastors for literally like 10 minutes and I can tell, are they enamored with ideas or are they enamored with people? Are they excited about, and you can be enamored with ideas as well, by the way. I mean, my background's in philosophy. I'm a complete nerd. I love geeking out on like string theory or any number of things. So I'm not saying you can't like that stuff. I'm just saying,
right. But you
The
can't
work
not
is with
like people.
Precisely.
That's
and,
right.
and be in the mess a little. Like
Yeah.
when you're in the mess with people, their real lives appear. I mean, my real life appears. Forget about their life.
Mm-hmm.
I have to get through my own insecurities or places where I'm arrogant or a know-it-all or whatever. And especially if I work with younger folks or older folk, people more than 5 to 7 years older than me, or more than 5 to 7 years younger than me. I'm out of my depth, or they're out of a different economic bracket than me, or a racial background.
Mm-hmm.
It just starts to feel weird. Like, I don't know, you don't have the assumptions I have. But the kingdom and the gospel cut across.
Yes.
If I'm patient enough to make that the priority. Like, no, I'm with these people right now, with this leader, with this person. I'm going to be curious about them. I'm going to try and understand how their world works. And or evangelism really is the healthiest thing for leaders. Like the uninitiated ask the very best questions.
Mm-hmm.
And they're very direct and simple if they're honest. And if you can kind of get them to a place of safety, like, I mean, regularly unchurched people are like, is there a reason there's so much singing? Like, why is there so much singing? Like, I never sing like this. I don't know what this is, other than they're like, but then it's not every time, but like maybe a third of the time I start to really feel something. I feel like I want to cry or I want to clap, and that's weird too. And why is that happening? And like, that's a really straightforward question.
Yeah.
You have to, or why when we pray, why don't things happen?
Yeah. Yep.
Like, they should happen, right? Like, if God's able and he cares about us, and so the uninitiated are often the best teachers for me.
Yes. Oh yeah. They ask questions that a lot of people don't ask.
Yeah. Or I stopped asking at some point.
Yes.
I'm like, oh yeah, wait a minute. I remember wondering that. How did I get around? Wait a minute. What did I tell myself? I can't even remember. So yeah, but again, those are all things that require being in people's lives. Yeah.
Paul said to Timothy, the goal of our instruction is love.
Yes.
Like, that's the whole point, man.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And it's easy to get professionalized.
Yep.
And lose track of how those stages. And frankly, most leaders are better at one part than another. Like, I'm better with unchurched people than I am with, leaders, or I'm great with leaders, but I don't know what I think about this, like the poor. It's just hard to work with the poor because I was raised with money, or man, I've been poor my whole life, so to work with people who have money feels really awkward to me. And so again, even in that work of life on life, you grow.
Yeah, you do.
But that's you have to make a ruthless commitment to being that kind of leader. Because if you're pretty good at what you do, no one holds you accountable to that.
Yeah.
They just are going, yeah, just do your thing. You're great at your thing, and just do that. And you're like, you know what? I am good at that thing. I'm just going to do that. But you start to rot. You don't.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not instant. There's like a hiddenness to it that takes a minute to notice sometimes. So again, I'm just grateful for the way God interrupted my life, because those simple tools were laid into the foundation of how I understand life, let alone ministry. And I have a wife that wants to do that. That's another thing, be married and have somebody's like, yeah, I'm in for it. We're going to have people live with us. We're going to host people in our home. And I know that's not true for everybody. That's
right.
Challenges. Yeah.
When we think about the stages, and you mentioned already that some people, and you in particular, feel even more comfortable, or like you like to be with the not yet believer, yes. And that I think a lot of times churches don't think about, okay, we've got to actually help someone move from dead to alive.
Totally.
Which requires really the art of neighboring. It's the hospitality. It's the creating the space for them to even discover that they don't have something and that they need something. Yep. I'm curious, how have you, I think this is one of your strengths from reading your book and the influence you've had on many people. What are some effective ways you found to help people create those safe spaces or hospitable spaces for those who are yet to be born again to really start to come to see what life could look like for them.
Yeah, I mean, for me, hospitality is the thing. Hospitality is evangelism. Hospitality is in the list of the attributes of an elder, for example, in
Yep.
Paul's writing, like the ability to be with people in a way that makes them feel comfortable, where they're allowed to be themselves,
Mm-hmm.
is like a real gift. And there's a
Yeah.
way to learn to be hospitable. And part of the work, I think, of pastors is to teach people how to be hospitable.
Hmm.
And some of that's geography. I mean, for me, it's about neighbors. I mean, I think Jesus offered us a really simple command that might change the world if we would do it
Hmm.
with our literal neighbors. So that's a good starting point.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I like your language. It's creating space, it's being hospitable. And then I also try to make it less scary for folks in that you're allowed to use interests you already have.
Hmm.
So, like, if you like reading books, you can be in a book club. If you like playing basketball, you can just play basketball with people. If you like playing golf, go play golf. If you like whatever you like, there's people that probably like that. And you're allowed to work out of your natural, like, things you enjoy to be connected to people. If your kids are playing soccer and you're with other people's kids who are playing soccer, there's like humans standing around with you. Like, if you just say, I'm going to be really connected to people in these environments. And then, so hospitality, work with what you already got. And then the last thing I'd say is learn the power of questions.
Mm-hmm.
It's less about what you want to say. It's more about demonstrating that you care.
Yeah.
And, there's a little book called Jesus Asked by a guy named Conrad Gempf. Conrad's become a friend.
Hmm.
And he basically asked the question, why did Jesus ask more questions than he answered? In all of the Gospels, he answers 2 questions directly ever. The rest of the time, he asks questions and he tells stories.
Yeah.
And that's a skill that can be learned. You can learn how to become curious about people. Every single person who's alive is interesting.
Yes.
Every person.
Yep.
They have pains that they've been through. They have joys and celebrations. They have gifts that were handed to them through their story and curses. They have opportunities and they have losses. They have joys and they have pain. And if you're able to just slow down enough to be like, tell me about where you're from and tell me about why you do what you do. And what are you learning about being a dad, or what's interesting? What are you hoping for this next year? Or if you're able to interact with people through questions, you will be able to bring the depth that you have, assuming you have that, by the way, because you have to have a deep life with God in order to share a life with God.
Yeah.
But I think that's stuff you can learn. So you have to create a context, be in an environment you already enjoy, or it's available to you, and then just learn how to be with people in a way where you're curious about them.
Mm-hmm.
And my hunch is you will never have to work to share your faith if you do those.
Yes. I completely agree with you. Yep.
You just will.
Yeah. I mean, something I want to say though, because it's in you, and I want to make sure I say this out loud. You, from the beginning of our recording of this podcast, have been talking about curiosity. That when you became a brand new follower, you didn't know anything, but you just kept asking questions. When you hit a roadblock, you said, okay, I got to learn about that. I want to just say that that's called humility. That's like at the base of what wisdom looks like, is that I'm always seeking more wisdom. I believe wisdom cries out from the streets. I don't think I have all the answers. That's a big part of who you are. And if we don't say that, I think people just go, I'll just be curious. It's like, no, curiosity is about humility, right? It's about not assuming you know everything and that you actually want to learn more. And I really, just the little bit of time that we spent together already, Jay, I want to say that back to you. I think that's a real gift that you're modeling in all of these answers, which has been really encouraging to me. I think Francis Schaeffer said, if I had an hour with a person, I would spend the first 55 minutes asking good questions. So in the last 5 minutes, I might have some kind of idea of something helpful to share. And I just think that's brilliant, man. And it's loving. It's the most loving thing to do, is to be curious about someone else's life.
Totally. Well, and they are, I mean, that's very kind of you to say that. And I do think some of it is my origin story. Like I said, the fact
Hmm.
that I know that I don't know a lot of things helps. And that's not
Yeah.
just coy, it's true. Like I actually don't know what's going on in this person's life. Why would I assume to
Hmm.
know anything about them? And I think as a leader,
Hmm.
it's cultivating that again as a skill where
Hmm.
when I have an expectation and then something happens different than my expectation, the speed at which I make meaning and make a judgment is lightning fast.
Hmm.
The smarter you are, the more you do that
Hmm.
because you're like, hey, I've seen this before. I know what this is. The kind of restraint required to interrupt that process, even mentally. So you're talking with someone, and the most important thing they want to tell you is, I'm a Republican. Okay. Now just notice when I said that out loud, what happens in your mind? You go, oh,
Yeah,
well, that means this, 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 and this.
that's right.
Okay.
Yep.
It takes a minute to go, oh, that's very interesting. You could have said anything you want to say to me, and you chose to say that. I wonder why. I wonder what that means. Like, so to be able to
Hmm.
say, that's really interesting. So
Yeah.
tell me why that's important to you. Why
Yeah.
did you want me to know that?
Yeah.
Um, so it's interrupting your own processes to be curious about,
Hmm.
man, I wonder why that works that way for you. And if you can live that way, every person is interesting forever.
Hmm. Yes,
Every
that's right.
person. I
Yeah.
mean, and it's really hard to be an enemy of someone that's interested in you.
Yeah.
Because as soon as people hear I'm a pastor, I mean, you want to talk about people making a set of assumptions.
Yes.
Like they're like, blah, 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 blah. I know what this means.
Yep.
And so if I can just be the person that's interested, like I actually
Hmm.
care,
Hmm.
those gifts fire in every arena of life, in
Hmm.
evangelism, in discipleship, in leadership development. They're just helpful tools to have,
Hmm.
because you love people, you care for them when you do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's my experience. That's how most people I know come to Christ
Yeah.
is after we do that a while, they go, well, gosh, I didn't even get a chance to hear how you think about this or that. No, let me tell you a few things based on what you said. Here's like three things we have in common. And here's something I think you'd think was interesting about me based on this other
Hmm.
thing you said is I,
Hmm.
I do believe in Jesus. And let me tell you why. I had an encounter with God, changed my
Hmm.
life. So I know that might not be something that makes sense to you, but that's what happened to me.
Hmm.
And if you'd be interested, I'd love to tell you more about that. Or maybe
Yeah.
and there's breathing space.
Yeah.
And I find most people when they think about evangelism, they're thinking about taking up all the space.
Hmm.
And that's exhausting. I mean, who first
Yes.
of all, who wants to do that? Like what kind of person is like, you know what I want to do? I want to go and just talk at people for it's exhausting. I mean, who wants
No,
let's put it this way.
no wonder nobody wants to do it.
Well, that's right. And if the people want to do that, we don't want them doing it. Okay. So,
That's right. That's right.
so you want to do that? Definitely not you then. So,
Let's give you something else to do for a while.
yeah, exactly.
Oh,
But the people we want talking don't talk.
that's right. That's right.
And so it's learning
Ah,
those things. And that makes for evangelism, that makes for discipleship. It makes for, honestly, just a loving culture.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's on the soccer field. Frankly, as a preacher, I'm always trying to tell preachers, think in dialogue. Think in dialogue.
Hmm.
When you're saying
Yep.
something, imagine your audience trying to understand what you're saying and the question
Hmm.
they might ask. And, even when it's just you talking, think in dialogue and ask
Hmm.
good questions. But these are
Yep.
skills that can be learned, I think.
Yes. Yeah. Early on in the very first church that we planted in the Soma family of churches, every sermon was a dialogical sermon. Like
Yeah.
we actually made the people who were up front communicating
Yeah.
ask at least three questions
Yep.
of the room so that they learned how to be a listener and not just a
Yes.
proclaimer. But
Yeah.
that also modeled then for our people, that's what we want you to be doing every day.
Oh,
So,
totally. Well, and it's attractive. I mean, I'm amazed when people remember anything I've ever said to them. Like, you're at a party with somebody, you meet someone, and the next time you see them, they're like, hey, last time I talked to you, you were about to go on that trip to Mexico. How did that go? I mean, even if it's that minor,
Yes.
they've showed me something. They've showed me that they care about me.
That's right.
Like I've lived somewhere inside of their mind, inside of their heart.
Yeah.
And so that power of listening, paying attention, trying to remember,
Hmm.
demonstrates love. And these are all
Mm.
things that anybody can do. You
Mm.
really can. This is not
Mm-hmm.
expert level stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't have to be like, what's the cultural critique of atheistic, individualistic consumerism? It's like, yeah, there's people that need to do that work. Most of us just need to be kind and
Yeah. Yeah.
thoughtful
Oh
and
man.
engaged.
If we just started doing that, just think about many opportunities we'd have to love people so well.
Yep. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, because frankly, it's in short supply.
It is.
I mean, most people I have a conversation with like this, they'll often say something like, man, I haven't had a conversation like this in years.
Yeah. Yep.
And what that is, I think to myself, I've had like 4 today. Like,
Mm.
I mean, like
Yeah.
I'm living like that. Like,
Yeah.
and that's attractive that people care and they engage. And that's what I think you see in Jesus, that way of
Mm-hmm.
his ability to be totally present with people. I mean, that's why I love the first part of John, all those little dialogues, where all kinds of different people, he's able to just sort of stand with them in a moment and tell a story and make an observation and ask a question and then step in. Boom. All right.
Yeah.
Here's what I
That's
want to say.
right.
Um, I think it's a way of leading or just being a human that
Mm.
is successful.
Mm. Oh, this is really good. We're coming to the end of our time, but I want to ask you so many more questions.
Well,
it's okay. This was so. We could do it again.
I like you. It'd be fun to hang out. Yeah,
Yeah.
but these are lived experiences, right? The things we're describing, you just got to live them.
Yes.
You got to try.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
fumble around. Every once in a while, you're like, "Ooh, that was not great. I did a bad. I mean, I should have paid more attention to this person."
Hmm.
But it's a way of living. You can learn this, and if we had
Yeah.
communities that live this way,
Yeah. I
that's
believe you
attractive.
must have, because people become like their teachers. So, I mean, like that is, the reality of disciple making, whatever system, whatever plan, whatever process or pathway you put in place, at the end of the day, people are still going to become like the ones that they're following.
That's right. I agree with that. Yeah. Well, which is why the number one goal of any leader is to focus on their life.
Yes.
Like, am I actually in love with the Lord? Do I really love my wife? Where are the spots that have maybe just gotten atrophied a little?
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily in danger. I'm just kind of bored.
Yeah.
Those things matter because you do reproduce who you are. You don't just reproduce
Mm-hmm.
what you say or what you think, what you hope for.
Yeah.
And again, you're right. You can build all kinds of processes. This kind of class, this kind of information we want to teach, and then this thing we'll try. But yeah, it is almost always life on life. That's what tends to last, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think about the most transformative stuff in my life often was in a car driving somewhere. It was, in the restaurant with the two folks at the break. It was the random night I got the phone call that somebody's in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the kind of stuff you can prepare for.
Hmm.
You're either living that way or you're not.
Hmm.
And there's some cool moments where, I got to teach or be at a conference or whatever, but that's pretty rare.
Yeah.
It's pretty rare. It's a fun dinner. It's funny how many of these things happen at like meals, right? Like that one night you were with that group of folks in your backyard and you laughed together. It's a taste of the kingdom.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you got to live that way. You got to make
Yeah.
space for that. You have to You have to get vulnerable in certain ways. You have to,
Mm-hmm.
but it feels accessible to me
Yeah.
and humanizing,
Mm-hmm.
and then learn a
Yeah.
lot. I
Everything.
love reading.
Yeah.
I just read a lot.
Everything you described is can be normalized. It's life, and like we'll often say in our context, discipleship requires life on life, life in community, life on mission.
It's great.
It's like you got to have a few people that really know you and you know them.
Yes.
You'd start doing life together in ways that you express the one another's. We're loving each other, bearing with each other, praying for one another, all the one another's.
Yes.
And then we do that with some people who don't know Jesus. And it isn't much more complex than that.
No, it really isn't. And to your point, if you're doing the first thing well, it will leak into all the things.
Yep.
A real life with God.
Yep.
Goes a long way, it turns out. And then a real life with some people.
Yep.
Builds skills by which you're like a human with people who don't have faith. It's accessible.
Yeah.
But sadly, we do all this stuff to these poor Christians, and they get weirder and weirder or less human.
Yeah, that's right.
And we train them to be not human. Like, well, make sure you say these 4 things. And it's like, oh my gosh, I guess I got to do that. And I wonder how that's going to go. And my uncle's going to be really mad or whatever. And it's like, why are we doing that to you? I mean, if you're a coward, you should learn how to not be a coward. I mean, there are plenty of cowardice problems. I don't think that's mostly it. I think it's mostly people don't know how to live deeply with people.
Yeah.
Because when you live deeply and you're connected, you talk about your life. It's not that scary.
No.
You just talk about it. I mean, it's like, here's what I'm learning. And I don't know, maybe that's helpful to you.
Yeah. Jesus said it's out of the overflow of the heart that the mouth speaks. So if there's depth there, then there's plenty it's going to come out.
Yes. Yep. Yes. And it's funny because when I talk about these things, sometimes people are like, well, you're obviously really extroverted. And it's true. I am. The truth is my wife is infinitely more fruitful than me in the things we're describing. It's not even close. Because she's very introverted. Mm-hmm. So I'll be along the sideline talking to everybody, and she's talking to one person.
Yeah.
And if I'm very honest, my thought always is that poor person. Like they are going to be a puddle. She just loves people so well. And she just asks questions and makes observations. And, she's like, the image I've always had, she's a spelunker. She's like in the center of the earth in their life, and they're like, what is happening to me? She's spiritual director by training.
Wow.
So again, this isn't even temperament based, right? All kinds of different kinds of people can do this kind of work in their own way.
Yeah.
But it's setting that out. Like I'm connecting with people deeply so that I can train them to be these kinds of people. Mm-hmm. That's maturity.
It's good. So last question. I didn't prepare you for this. Are you an Ohio State fan?
I mean, listen, my blood is scarlet and gray.
Because I'm from Michigan, so I can't even believe we had this whole conversation. And
well, we're about to find some things out tomorrow, aren't we? Isn't tomorrow? It's soon the announcement. I almost bought myself a Michigan surveillance team shirt. I saw it. I saw the novelty shirt, and I thought that is awesome. I am buying that. And I went, this is too much. Okay.
Oh my goodness.
Have a penalty. So I didn't buy it for what it's worth.
Oh man. We'll see what happens. I mean, my dream was I wanted to see Ohio State and Michigan at the end. Like that'd have been the ultimate game of games, like
I know. Well, we've almost done it a few times.
I know. We should have actually.
We should have.
Anyway.
I know. Yeah.
I hate you, but I also love you.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's a problem. I mean, when I was at Ohio State, we couldn't win no matter what. I mean, that was the Cooper years. Then when I left, we won for a whole bunch. And now it's definitely flipped. So
it has flipped, yeah.
It's pretty fun. I love it.
It is fun, yeah. Greatest rivalry, I think, in all sports. So
no question. Yes. Yep. No question. Yeah, there was an actual war. about it. So that means it's a real rivalry. It's not a pretend one. It's a real one. Yeah.
It's a real one. Oh, Jay, thank you so much. I'm curious if people wanted to check in more on the resources you've created, or I know you have a podcast, you have some other things that might serve people. Where would you direct people if they want to find out more, get some more of the thought leadership you have in this area?
The bad news is I'm not an innovator. I'm a thief. And so if you wanted to ask me, I would just tell you about all the other people I really like.
Okay.
But yeah, we have a church. I mean, so the milehighvineyard.org has all our church resources on it. I'm a vineyard guy, so vineyardusa.org is all the vineyard stuff we do nationally. And then if you just, use the almighty Google,
they'll find you.
I'm around doing random things like this. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being with us. And I look forward to you sharing at Exponential. I think it's going to be a real blessing for people to hear from you.
I am very, very honored and deeply intimidated and very excited for the opportunity. Yeah.
That's going to be great. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for being you. You were a gift this hour. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Well, I hope it's helpful. And I would do, again, I love Exponential. I love the work. I believe serving and equipping pastors to help reproduce ministry is the whole deal. So I'm really, really grateful for the friendships I've formed and any way I can serve. And from time to time, you need a weird charismatic to show up and pray and do stuff. And I'm your guy.
Good. Thanks again.
Yeah, of course.
I'd love to invite you to join me and Dave Ferguson, co-founder and president of Exponential, to continue this conversation on how we can return to disciple making in our local churches. The pressing need to refocus on disciple making has never been greater. I'm excited to unpack this conversation we've had more with Dave and with you. And the goal of this webinar is that we would make it an interactive Q&A session and leave with a renewed sense of purpose for your personal ministry and church community. So I'd love to call you to join us on November 30th at 2 p.m. Eastern. You can visit exponential.org/180. That's one word, 180, to register and submit your questions in advance. So don't miss this opportunity. We'd love for you to join us. We think it's going to be a great chance for us to interact with you and for all of us to grow together in how we become more committed to making disciples who make disciples.